Tonight, we welcome Nancy Willey of Cherryfield, long known as the Baseline Lady for reasons you will very soon see. She has conducted tours and has had a major interest in this Epping Baseline over the course of her teaching career, and has brought student groups to see it and so forth. As I'm sure she'll tell you as well, it's the only baseline of the six in the country that is still traceable even. The other five have been completely lost. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Ms. Nancy Willey of Cherryfield.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out. It was so hot today. I said there won't be many out tonight, but thank you anyway. I'm stuffed up with allergies, but I'll use my teacher voice so you can hear me okay. All right. I'm sure you're wondering how this old gray-haired lady got interested in the baseline. Well, about 42 years, by the way, this is my 42nd year that I'm doing this, and I'm still enjoying it. Probably 43, 44 years ago, I was still teaching at Millbridge. I'm a social studies teacher. And at that time, some of you will remember, the whole world was going to go metric. Do you remember that? And so, of course, we all had to take a metrics course, and which we did. Well, at the end of the course, our professor said, I want you each to come up with some kind of a program or a lesson plan for your discipline and present it to us. That will be your final paper. And of course I thought, what on earth am I going to do? And so I took it back to my 8th graders for main history. And I said, thought of the baseline. If you've been up on 193, if you've taken Cherryfield going up 193, there's a signpost. We have a street sign up there that says baseline. And if you go in that road, probably 1.5 miles, you will actually hit the original baseline road, okay? So I thought, well, what could we do with that? So I thought, well, we could measure it. It's 5.4 miles. And if we measure it in meters, there's my term paper. So I talked it over with my kids, and because Millbridge, I mean, they are all lobster fishermen and so forth. And one of the boys said, Mrs. Willey, why don't we measure it with a lobster warp? And I said, a what? I'm 5 miles inland, you know. So he said, yeah, it's a big rope. Of course, you people are all familiar with it. Huge, big piece of rope, 50 feet long. So I think I had 26 kids in the class that year. So we divided them up, and that's what we did. They put that lobster warp over their shoulder, and they would measure out 50 feet, and then the next 7 or 8 kids would come along and take it, and that's how we measured it. And there are over 8,000 meters in that 5.4 miles across there. Yeah. And what we would do, because the kids loved it, not because of the history or so forth. They could get outdoors. They were not in the classroom. And so Paul Bradbury, who was our school bus driver, he was our janitor for years at Millbridge. He would drop us off over in Columbia. And then we'd take our gear, they each had backpacks, plenty of food, and we would walk across, of course. And then, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd come up with that street sign is on the Du Bois Road, Baseline, there's a, I call it a rabbit club. But what they do, they train beagles. It's a beagle club up there. It's right there. He'd meet us there, and we would all get aboard and come back home. Yep. So that's how I got started with this. And of course, what happened, the first year we went in the spring. Well, that's not a good time to go. The bugs and all of that. And also, at that time, there are 2 brooks you have to cross. There were no bridges. And so I'd always say, now kids, you be very careful. I don't want you getting wet. And so guess what? They just plowed in and went across. They did help me across. But see now, the blueberry companies, Cherryfield Foods and Wyman's, they now transport the berries across, and so there are bridges over the brook. So you can drive right across now. It's a little rough on the eastern end, but you can drive right across with you. Yeah. So that's how I got interested. Well, of course, the other kids found out that the 8th graders went. Well, how come we can't go, Miss Willey? So I thought up a plan. Well, because I was junior high, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I thought, I can't do this every year. So why not every 3 years and take 6th, 7th, and 8th grade? So that's what we did in Millbridge. And then my grandson went to school in Cherryfield. Well, of course, they heard that Millbridge had gone. So he said, Nana, how come Cherryfield can't go? So I said, well, talk it over with your teacher and the principal, and I'll love to take you. So I took Cherryfield. And then Harrington found out about it. And then Columbia Falls found out about it. And Addison found out about it. So we've been doing it ever since. But I really enjoy it. I love it. And let me tell you right off, I am no expert. I am not an expert. This is just a passion of mine that I love, and how I got started doing this. Okay, so. Now, do you mind if I take you back tonight? You're going to be 8th graders. Do you mind?
No, we don't mind it.
Okay. And look, a lot of this material I have had, well, I've been retired now for, 22 years. I've had all of this material. And I don't know, I just love it, and so I bring it along with me, so if you don't mind. Okay, let's find out what the baseline is. Now, what is a baseline? It's the base of a triangle. And that is what they use for the triangulation of the measurement that we're doing. Now, why? Okay? The United States was emerging as a world power. Actually, Thomas Jefferson, back in 1806, wanted to have the coastline more accurately measured. So they were even thinking about it way back then. Right? But, okay, so we were becoming a world power, the shipping lanes and so forth, and so that needed to have a more accurately measured coastline. Okay. Who? Okay. A.D. Bach. He was the second superintendent of the baseline of the Coastal Survey. The first one was Hassler. Now this Hassler was from Switzerland, and he's the one that designed this triangular and the baseline measurement. And they put out a call. Albert Gallatin at that time was Secretary of War, Secretary of State, and they put out a call for somebody to come up with a way to measure these baselines. And so Hassler submitted his measurements from because he is from Switzerland, okay? Now, because you hear about the baseline, you don't hear so much about Hassler, you don't hear so much about Bach, you hear about Jefferson Davis. Well, Jefferson Davis, at the time that this was all going on, was Secretary of War under President Pierce. And so that's how he played. But also, Jefferson Davis and Alexander Bach were classmates at West Point. And they became very, very friendly. And so when the road was finished, Jefferson Davis at this time was in ill health and suffering. He had some eye problems and so forth. And he had moved back to Mississippi. And Bach, Alexander Bach, invited Jefferson Davis and his wife, Varina, and 2 children up to see the baseline and see what they have done. So yes, Jefferson Davis did come to Cherryfield. It did come and did survey the road and so forth up there. So I like to tell the kids when we're walking along, you could be walking in the footsteps of Jefferson Davis. Because that doesn't mean anything to them. Okay, when? 1853 to 1857. Now in 1853, they came up, they sent up several reconnaissance parties to see where would be the best place to build this road. Now think about it. From Alabama, across the Gulf Coast, and up the East Coast. Pretty much sandy beaches, real lowland. Well, what happens when you get to Maine? The rock-bound coast of Maine. And so when they got up here, they had to go inland. So they went in 6 or 7 miles inland, and that's why ours is the only one left today. Now you imagine down on the Gulf Coast, there's probably condominiums and big malls and so forth, all have been eroded away. But because of where ours is, the location, it remains. It's the last one up there. And that's why I like to, talk about this and see the importance of that road. See, okay. Now what is it? It's a series of 6 triangles from Alabama to Maine. Our case, Columbia to Du Bois. Columbia to Du Bois. Yeah. And I've brought along a lot of things, and I'll try to explain it the best way that I can. Oh, I am not a surveyor, and I'm certainly not a mathematician, and because I don't really delve into that. I kind of do the history of it and the reason it was there. See, and the reason we're becoming world power, and we want our coast better measured and protected. But as far as asking me to give you the formula for Pythagoras' theorem, that was a long time ago. I don't know where a squared plus b squared equals c squared or something like that. But anyway, this is it. Now, this is a picture of the monuments. They're not there anymore. Out on the eastern end, it's open plateau. And of course, that monument was made from Chiara marble from Italy. Very soft. It was used as ballast in the shipping coming over. Very cheap. Now in a lot of our cemeteries in our area, you'll find this for tombstones, this Chiara marble. And so the Eastern Monument, because it was open, of course vandals chiseled it away and so forth. So what's left of it, about this much, is up beside our Cherryfield Narragansett Historical Society. The Western Monument, this is what it looked like all these years that I've been taking the kids up there. Here in 2004, I think it was, the state came down, which I was sad but glad in a way. They came down and took it to Augusta. So it's up in the State Museum in Augusta. But at least it will be preserved. And I feel guilty in a way because the Western Monument, unless you know right where it is, because it's shrouded with trees, see, I kept taking the kids up there. And I think they kept going back and so forth. But anyway, I'm happy it's in Augusta and it will be preserved, of course. But this is what it actually looked like. And it had the apex in it, north, south, east, and west. Yeah, and the date on it that it was chiseled in there and so forth. Okay, now, how on earth did they measure this? Okay. Can you all see? Afterwards, you can come up and look. This is a tube, 20 feet long, that they measured it by. And inside that, it was wrapped in canvas. And inside that tube were two levers. Yeah, I think one was brass and the other, I can't remember what the other one was, but anyway. And they had several men. You had 4 men who were the tube bearers, 4 men leveling the trestles, these little, we call them sawhorses, trestles. 3 men carrying the trestles, 2 men setting plates, 1 attending to aligning everything, making sure it was level and even. And 1 extra hand for incidental work. Okay. Now this is a picture of them and what they do. They piggyback those. Once they got that clapped together and did all their measurements, making sure that it was all aligned correctly and so forth. And then they would unsnap that clap and piggyback that 20-foot over and put that one on and so forth. It was amazing how many that they could do in a day. That's I'm very fortunate to have a copy of the actual day-to-day going on what happened. And sometimes they do 200 a day, sometimes only 100. But they had rainy weather, very rainy weather. And so they were hampered quite a bit. They would have been constructed much more quickly had they had good weather, but they didn't. And yeah. So, yeah. And that's the baseline, okay. This is from the Vanguard Daily News. That's the 1980 something. Now, think about it. They hired local people, local men, to clear the land of a lot of boulders. Because don't forget, we once were covered by a great glacier. It came down from Hudson Bay. And that glacier, of course, acted just like a snowplow. It just pushed everything away, gouged into, and it left a lot of boulders. And so they had to clear all of that first. Then they measured it. See? That's how it was done. And so, and in this article, I've run off some papers. I don't know if I got enough so that you can take home and read. When the GPS system came in here a few years ago, they measured this for accuracy they found out that this measurement, it was only less than a half an inch off. Now you think of it, yeah? It's pretty amazing that that would happen, yeah. So, but anyway, okay, and let's see, somewhere here I've got, oh, now this is, they built towers, and I'll get ahead of myself here. This is what, at the eastern end and the western end, they built these wooden towers, okay? And it was used in measurement, and there was a tin cone at the top of the tower. That was called a heliotrope. A heliotrope. And the reason they named it heliotrope is because the heliotrope plant itself will turn its flowers toward the sun. And see, they use sunlight to cast on these tin heliotropes and do that measurement that way. And again, don't ask me to explain how. Okay. And this, all right, these are all local mountains, which you're familiar with, I'm sure. Okay, here's a baseline, okay? We have Cooper, which is down east. We have Howard Mountain, Pigeon Hill, Mount Desert, Tunk, and Burke. And I do have the measurements on the back of how high those mountains were. Now, when we first started going up there, the western monument sits on a granite bluff. And of course, the trees hadn't grown up. You could look. What an expanse. Just a beautiful, beautiful expanse. It's all grown up today, of course, all grown up. And so you can't see, okay. So, for instance, Humpback, Lead Mountain up on the airline, that's 1,480 feet, okay? And as it goes on down, so there's Tunk, Catherine's Mountain, Caribou Mountain, Black Mountain, Scoodic Mountain, Burke, and so forth. And that's what they used, and here you can see. So there were towers, see, but the main ones were, of course, on the western end and the eastern end of that base line. And that's, you can see here. In fact, in the base of this outcropping at the western end, we found where one of the posts were, one of the legs had been embedded in that rock for years. There, now, the west end of the baseline. And that's of course how they did that. And let's see, I told you about the heliotropes. That always fascinated me because I always thought of it as a flower or a plant of some kind. But that's the reason. It's Greek. And it's because that heliotrope turns its flowers toward the sun. And of course this is how they got the, and this is a picture. This is the only time, you see the ladies in there? I think they're telling the men what to do. That's how it got built, I think. And they, of course, people would come up to see what they were doing and everything. And then this particular day, and I have read in that journal that this is the only time that a photographer came up to take pictures, and it was on our baseline. Yeah, and you can see the ladies there. This looks like, now, I'm sure you, of course, you're familiar with our bears, Cherryfield bears. Yeah. And if you go in, here's a nice picture also. See? And there's just one part that has grown up so that you have, the road goes out around, but doesn't, not very far. But other than that, you can go and you can look straight across that road, and it is very, very straight. Yeah. Listen, see the horse wagon there? Now, I'm very fortunate to have these, because most of them have disappeared, but Harold Nelson, who worked with the Department of Transportation, read somewhere about this little old gray-haired teacher who taught the baseline to her kids, and he came down to visit. And look, he brought me all of these pictures. Yes, so they're very, very special to me, yeah? And because there aren't any pictures of them that were there. And this shows you, this is this was the last class, this was from Harrington 8th graders that I took across the baseline before they came and got the monument. Yeah. Again, I was sad, but yet I know I have to be glad it's being preserved, because that would also be chiseled away and it would be lost, of course. So, now, Frog Rock. Oh, kids love Frog Rock. We start at the Eastern Inn. Paul drops us off, and that's probably, Frog Rock is probably a mile and a half in. So, because I always had a rule, if I took parents with me too, to be supervised, you're not to go so far ahead that I can't see you. I want to be able to see you. and then they were good that way, but they couldn't wait to get Frog Rock. Now kids, when we get to Frog Rock, I don't want you climbing all over it. I don't want anyone getting hurt. Guess what? By the time we got to Frog Rock, it was covered with kids. But look, I've been doing this now for 42 years. I've never lost a kid. I did, who was the gentleman I was talking to? I took the senior citizens. He was just, there was some gentleman here. I took a group of senior citizens one year out of the Shires. They acted so bad. I threatened to send them to the principal's office. But we had a wonderful time. We had a great time. And I've taken second graders, I think from Winter Harbor. Mrs. Tina, Sue Tina.
Third grade.
Where's she, Gouldsboro? Was she? She taught at Gouldsboro? Well, of course, I'm in that family too. And so she brought her second graders over, and we went up on the baseline. And they were wonderful, because you had to, water it down somewhat. So, but look, when you get up there on that ridge, on Epping Plain, you're 260 feet above sea level. And you can stand there, and you can see Narragansett Bay, you can see Millbridge. Okay? Now, I've learned that ice, when that glacier came down, that was at least 2 miles high. Think of the pressure that exerted on the land, and that's why we have all of these things. So, yeah, and so it's just fascinating that, to me, of course, I enjoy doing this stuff. And, okay, let's see what else I brought. I'm showing you this. And, I want to talk a bit about Jefferson Davis. Although he was a good friend of Alexander Bach, of course, later on he became president of the Confederacy, as we know. But some of the things, did you know that when he was Secretary of War under President Pierce, he had camels from Arabia brought to the United States? Yeah, that's just a little fact, okay? And of course, as president of the Confederacy after the Civil War, he was imprisoned, of course, and later on he was pardoned 2 years after. Yeah, and okay, cast of characters, which I've already mentioned, Alexander Bach, who was the second super. Hassler, I did this earlier, didn't I? Hassler from Switzerland. He's the one that brought over the measurement, how to measure. They used it. I've read that he and his father was extremely intelligent mathematician also, and they're the ones who came up with this measuring device, and so came over. And so Albert Gallatin, he was Secretary of the Treasury, and also the only one thing I cannot find in the journal how much our baseline cost. Of course, there were no chainsaws. I'm sure it was picked and shoveled. Of course, they'd had bulldozers, not bulldozers, steam shovels had been invented, so possibly they used those. Now that road is 12 feet wide, and they had to build it up a lot with the boulders along the way. Yeah. By the way, Frog Rock, it is so large, any huge boulder is called an erratic geology. We mix this all in, of course, with our kids. And you can see how red they are. So fall is really the best time to go. The leaves are turning, and those blueberry bushes are just thousands of shades of red and orange, and it's just beautiful. Okay. Now, Scooter Hill, that's the highest point along the road. I have a boulder on Scooter Hill. It belongs to me. That boulder, it has a little level incline for old people, which I can't do it now. I'll have to admit, I can't get up there now. But I used to go up with my dog and let him run, and I could just walk up this little smooth incline and sit right up on top of that boulder and look. I could see Cherryfield Ridge, I could look over and see Columbia and Harrington, and I'd just sit there and think and let the rest of the world go by. It's so peaceful, it's so beautiful up there, it really is. So, well, I guess I pretty much, we know why. We were becoming a world power, and they wanted to make sure our coast was, all the little harbors and inlets and so forth, were measured more accurately, okay? And so that was the reason. And these are the men, these are the cast of characters, I like to say, that came up to do this show. Yeah. So, and I'd like to invite you up to look these over. And I have run off a few things in case you're interested. Okay? This will tell a lot about it. This is a picture of the monument, so help yourself to any of these. And then this one tells about these. This I copied right out of the journal. And the reason I did, it tells about why they chose Epping Plains. It's more smooth and so forth. But I wanted to see the handwriting. No computers. The handwriting. And then after Mrs. Tina brought her second graders up, I made a coloring book for them. And I said it a read-rhyme design called a storybook from A to Z. And they each went home with a copy of that. For instance, I won't go all through it, but welcome to you. A lone, chipped, and broken marble monument stands silent, but the history it could tell. B, the blueberry barrens, vast and remote, have kept its secret well. Now, if I can answer any questions, unless they're mathematical.